All right, my name is Gabino Roche. I'm going to cover Agile Portfolio Management at NYSE. So there's a lot to cover. I'm going to ask you to hold your questions to the end. I'm jam-packing this, so it might be going a little fast. Quick question for you guys. How many took algebra? I think most people, right? Can anyone give me the formula for how you determine a slope? Yes, y equals mx plus b. That's right. So the story here is taking algebra, I was able to get the answer most of the time, but my teacher never gave me full credit because I couldn't show my work, right? So that's why he told me, he would tell me, Gabino, you got to show me your work so I know that you didn't randomly arrive at the right answer, right? Point one, put that to the side. Going back earlier in my childhood, in grade school, I had a science project where I had to develop a computer program, and so it was the best basic language-based program you could come up with, but I got a B from the teacher. So being persistent and very, very ambitious, I chased after her with a stack of papers of all the lines of code in BASIC, and I put it in front of her and I said, please take a look at this. You'll see my due diligence. You'll see all the work that I did. Surely I deserve something better than an A. And she would tell me, you know, Gabino, I'm sure you did a lot of work, but please just show me what matters. I don't have the time to go through this entire stack, right? So point two, you know, there's a lot of data you could throw out there to measure things at, but show what matters, right? Try to reduce the level of noise, right, for people. So keep those 2 points in mind as I run through this slide, this deck, because then you'll see what I mean when we kind of run through it. So real quick, if you're going to walk out of here, there's 3 messages I want you to walk away with. One, at least in my example, how I attempted to demonstrate cost and value. The second point is around managing capacity and opportunity cost. The third, kind of generic, but you know, you can do agile portfolio management, but you can do it without all the jargon, right? A lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about has to do with dealing with the business. Business people aren't familiar with technology necessarily, right, or the jargon that we use, and that scares them sometimes. So you're going to hear about some of this in the story. Here's kind of the agenda. I'm going to skip this in the interest of time. If you want to get in touch with me, here's my contact information up top. I'm making a little plug here. I also run a mobile application company, so if anyone's into mobile apps, talk to me afterwards. A little bit about my background. I have about 16, 17 years software development experience. Worked at Fortune 500 companies like AT&T, UPS Corporate, some startups. I eventually wound up at McKinsey & Company, where I really honed in my Agile expertise. And while I was there getting into the Agile circles in New York City, I was approached by the New York Stock Exchange to help them run their technology groups, right? The exchange wants to become more of a technology company, less of a financial company. Why? Because you don't physically need people on the trading floor anymore to do trades. Most stuff is done electronically. Although, as you can see with the flash crash last year, there's still a need for humans to be involved, right? That's one unique thing that the New York Stock Exchange has that other exchanges don't have. So essentially what the exchange had done was buy a bunch of startup companies, mesh them together, and said, okay, now this is a new division of technology products we're going to sell to other financial institutions. Gabino, come in, demystify this black box of technology development so we can deliver stuff faster to market. Go, right? So this is what it looked like. The fall of 2008, this picture's from 2012, the movie, okay? But at that time, the presidential election was going on, right? And all the banks needed bailout funds, and all this discussion was pretty scary. But throughout my career, I aspired to work in the financial industry. And this opportunity to help be one of the leaders in this new division at NYSE was huge, but I was scared, right? One of the saving graces of going to the exchange was the exchange makes money basically off the spread, the bid and ask price, right? So it doesn't matter if this market's going up or down. So long as there's a lot of volatility in one direction or another, they make money, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm safe. So arriving there, well, let me give you a little more context about the exchange, right? So there's a typical cash equities, futures, options. They sell market data. They're in competition with Bloomberg and Reuters as well. Bonds, and then you have this other line item on the balance sheet called NYSE Technologies. This is where I sat, right? To the right is their listed products and services that they offer to other financial institutions. Here are some of the companies that they acquired, right, to form this division, right? So arriving there, I immediately asked, okay, well, what's our roadmap? What are our strategic priorities? You know, what things should we be pursuing? And the answer to all these questions were pretty much, there was no answer, right? It was all about revenue, money, 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 bottom line, right? And a lot of our financial customers or potential customers were now reeling back because they needed bailout funds. They weren't sure how much money they were going to invest in some of this stuff. So crazy time. So there were some major, major challenges, and I categorized them into 4 areas. The first one was that we had frequent changes in leadership. One example, the 3rd day on the job, the entire management team that hired me, gone. Okay? I was nervous. I was almost wondering to go back to McKinsey, but you know, I felt there was value, and what I saw was where there's chaos, there's opportunity. In any case, that makes it difficult to fulfill some visions, and the reason why, I mean, in the 2 years that I was there, management reorgs happened 6 times, major ones, okay? There were some small ones in between. And again, you have to realize that it was the nature of the market, right, and adapting to everything that was going on, but at the same time, this particular division was made up of 4 mini companies that are also competing against each other. That also made some of the engineers, some of the resources, employees feel insecure about their jobs, right? Because management changes, you have an affinity to that manager and he's gone. Some of these cases, you had a manager who stepped up with a vision and said, okay, we're going to sell this product, we're going to build it and whatnot. The revenues didn't come in, right? So he lost clout. So that's some of the problems that came by. Another part was fiefdoms, right? This is my company, my resources. I've managed them for so many years. I don't necessarily want to share them with other groups or other companies that used to compete with me, and now we're under one umbrella, right? So sometimes you had 2 of these little companies actually building the same product on 2 different platforms, and then we're trying to sell it to a client, but which one do we sell? They kind of both do the same thing, right? So again, there's redundancies, wasted effort, and that's not managing opportunity cost too well. Another problem, in the beginning, the technology resources reported up to the business. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that's a bad thing, but in this case, these particular managers saw engineers as kind of cogs in a wheel, right, and assemblymen workers, right? You can just pull one off and replace it with another one, everything will be fine, right? They didn't understand the high degree of specialty in the work that they did, the domain expertise, the fact that if you let them go, they're walking away with competitive knowledge and trade secrets and leaving to go work for NASDAQ or one of our competitors to do the same thing, right? So it took a while to kind of talk that through. The other last piece here, this one was a big one. The profitability of a product did not equate to the quality of the engineers. So sometimes when a whole product was deemed a failure, they would actually consider laying off all the engineers that were associated to it. And I had to battle to explain that the domain expertise was applicable to other areas, right? And they were going to lose valuable knowledge and resources in doing that. So it's a big hurdle. And the last point was sell vaporware. Why? The sales teams had a lot of pressure, right? Brand new products, unproven in the marketplace. No one's seen them before, right? Some of these salespeople came from those individual companies, and those individual companies had a certain product set and service, and they only knew about those certain products and services. They didn't get cross-trained across the other products and services to know how to sell them together. All right, so in some ways we weren't putting up our best foot to the clients about all our capabilities. At the same time, just to close the deal, they would promise something to the customer either because they were uneducated about what we could do, or they didn't know and they promised something that we didn't have, which we now had to deliver, which was the worst piece, right? So first things first, right? And by the way, I do want to say a lot of the stuff that I kind of go through, I've had some very, very good mentors in my past. Pete Barron's being one, which I'm going to cover here. Kenny Rubin is another. He's sitting in the back. If you guys attended his session yesterday, Agile Portfolio Management was phenomenal. He has a book called Essential Scrum. And if you want to see Agile Portfolio Management, or at least learn from it, Chapter 16, honestly the best thing you can get. Pete Barron's actually came into my office. He's from Trail Ridge Consulting. I needed his help because I would get all these requests from different clients, and I basically wanted to manage these contracts with the clients as a backlog of features, okay? The problem is that doing poker planning took too long, and trying to teach all these different resources how to do it consistently. I needed them to build working software, not spend hours poker planning over backlogs of of stuff that we may or may not do. So Pete actually suggested something called visual estimation. You can go to, I think he explains it briefly on his website. If not, you can reach out to him. Basically, take your backlog of stories and epics, throw them on the wall. It doesn't matter in any particular order. And then time box it for your resources. And I basically would tell them, guys, you got 30 minutes. Arrange these from easiest to hardest, left to right. Go. Right? Not a lot of time. They arranged it. Right? And afterwards, I say, okay, now organize them into 8 columns. They did that. And afterwards, then I would walk up with a sticky note. The first column, 1, second one, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. There are your estimates. We're done. You have no choice. That's it. Right? Problem solved. No hemming and hawing over your points. After a couple iterations, we'll see what your velocity is. Right? So that helped me quickly estimate things and get things moving. Now, I'm not saying that this is the way to do things, but this is a technique you could use. So now this basically helped me understand the general capacity of my teams relatively quickly when I started, right? Because the estimation process went fast. And then after a few iterations, I would have their average velocity. So that leads me then to the next part. Now this is really the heart of how I tried to do Agile portfolio management. I worked with another gentleman called David Hersey. His company is called ScrumWorks. He and I actually talked over about this concept of business value against your product backlog. Similar to the story point estimations, we came up with this scale of 5, 3, 1, 5 being the highest business value, 1 being the lowest. You go down your backlog, and with your product owners or stakeholders, you kind of determine which ones are the highest business value. The whole point is to prioritize the 5s at the top and the 1s at the bottom. There's a reason, well, there's an obvious reason for that, but you'll see the technique that I'm using here, why that was important. You might have some dependencies, like a 3 or a 1 in between, and that's okay. There are exceptions. So essentially, you add up your business value points. In this example, there's 30. After one iteration, you see that you've delivered 18 business value points. That's about 60% of the business value delivered on this particular backlog. What we discovered was right around when you got to 80% of the business value delivered, we could start having actual conversations with our clients that I can't name for confidential reasons, but tell them, you know, X company, we can deliver 80% of the stuff that you wanted today. And the remaining 20%, we could spend the next 8 weeks delivering it for you, but it's going to cost X amount of dollars, right? And I'm going to show you how you also measure the costs to this stuff. 9 times out of 10, those clients would say to me, Gabino, this speaks well of NYSE technologies. We will take the product now. We will schedule the remaining 20% at a later release later this year. Thank you very much. That freed up my resources to work on the next high-value project. In one example, there was that was an $88,000 deal for the next, 6 to 8 weeks. But there was a $250,000 contract we were not working on because our resources were still trying to finish this up. So if you guys attended Ken Rubin's session yesterday, the cost of delay, right? Most companies don't measure the cost of the delay. The opportunity cost for us not taking on that other project was huge. One, because we had competitors willing to take and deliver to that client before us. And two, we wanted to meet our numbers for the quarter. So one of the things we did to determine the cost per point is we would make some certain assumptions. So this should be, I think, pretty basic for most people. In our example, we measured $100 per hour per employee. This includes their health benefits, their vacations, and whatnot, 40-hour work week. For 2-week iterations, then you have 9 resources in a particular team, right? Product owner, scrum master, developers, engineers. $72,000 per iteration in this example, right? And then when you take a 3-month moving average of your velocity, you can come up with $1,440 per point. What does that mean? When we go back to our backlog and then we look at the story point estimations, we take that number and then you're getting your at-cost values per feature. Now, something to emphasize here, that is your at cost. For client-facing businesses, you now have to layer your profit margin on top of this, right? That's what we did, right? So now when you speak to your clients also, you can start talking about the full cost, which includes your profit margin per feature. So when you give that final number to say, hey, the remaining 20% is there, that's actually a real number they can pay attention to. In some cases, low business value items could be pretty pricey, but didn't deliver a lot. Right? So it was a great way to persuade them to kind of move on. And the good thing I did with the business was I was never saying no to the business. It was promised work that would happen just later. We could just maximize our opportunity by working on something that brought us in more revenue. Right? Another thing to kind of communicate to the business managing our efforts, I didn't have dedicated teams on a single project. It just wasn't the nature there. So I renamed, this is an actual bar chart, I renamed a lot of the initiatives and projects we were working on here to the right. This light blue one here was production support matters that could be handled by a level 1 production support team. But unfortunately, my expensive engineers were forced to address them. So what I did is actually I showed the business the effort that was put behind it. I actually put dollar figures behind it because that got them motivated, right? And said, you know, these expensive guys are doing these things that we have a production support team who could help us with this. Can you help me get them on board and trained so we can take care of this? Next week, this was a weekly bar chart, by the way. Next week, you saw how significantly it was reduced. And 2 weeks afterwards, it's gone, no longer there, right? This is an actual bar chart I used. And then there's your traditional burn downs, right, where you're trying to deliver to a particular date. This is your cone of uncertainty. The purple line is your pessimistic view. The green is your optimistic. Red is the actual. Basically communicating in the same terms of business value, cost of delivery, right? And we can review this offline after my session if you want to know some of these examples, but you can see that the business wind up choosing to go the faster route in this particular one. So in my story, I had to network quite a bit because with the changing of the guard and the leadership quite often, even though I was a managing director at the New York Stock Exchange, I needed to know all those players, right? And you got to remember the environment was unique because it was like a startup environment under the umbrella of a big bureaucracy, big corporation, right? So, you know, not only did I have to find out the new players for the division, but I had to work with all the security guys, right? All the network admins because everything was so sensitive and very, very, very slow. So if you're trying to deliver stuff faster to clients, especially if it sits on our network, to go through that approval process was a nightmare, okay? So I also then had to, you know, you're going to see a lot of people who talk about agile portfolio management, talk about a governance process. Unfortunately, with the changing of the guard and some strong-willed business managers, they thought they knew the answers. I had to create an informal environment of reviewing what what we call business cases. The business needed to justify why we had to pursue certain things. The good thing is I had a good relationship with the CIO of the company. Eventually, the engineering resources reported up into the technology hierarchy, and IT was beginning to be a respected stakeholder at the table. So that allowed me to be a little more influential in these discussions of how we're managing our resources. So I'm trying to time check here. So 2 types of business cases we had. And the first one was relatively simple. A sale is a sale. As soon as a client came in and they were going to close a deal with us to deliver something, it fell into this case 1 type, right? So it just came down to a matter of, okay, how much is it going to cost us? What else do we have going on that's in the pipeline? You know, what's our perceived profit margin? So let's compare the profit margin of this particular business case versus another one, right? And when does the client want this by versus when does our IT resources think we can deliver it by? Because that did matter. Before, the world before this, and even though this was somewhat informal, was the loudest sponsor or stakeholder for a client won. Whether it brought the most money or not, sometimes someone bullying somebody else, it was just crazy. Okay? So when I was able to put down numbers, and the reason why I cared and I had to be involved in the business is my resources were impacted. 120 employees constantly paying about all these different requests. If I didn't get a business justification, I didn't want them working on it, right? At the end of the day, I needed to be a good steward of my employees. Case type 2 was a little more difficult. These were the strategic type of products that we didn't know there was a real demand for. Remember, these are greenfield products, right? So we had to look at the relative risk of putting it out there. The most important piece was identifying what we called a lighthouse customer. I don't know if everyone knows that term, but it's a customer who's willing to try your product for free for a certain extended amount of time so that you can evolve it and get it market ready, right? So that was the most important factor in getting a go, because if there wasn't anyone willing to try it, then what are we going to build, right, without verifying it with a client? And then finally, I talked about the selling and the vaporware and all that jazz, but that had a lot to do with the fact that there wasn't really mind share on all the products, right? And this role of a product owner really didn't exist. So eventually, though, as the business was maturing, and there was actually some McKinsey folk who came in, we started this concept of product management. Essentially, it's product owners, where you had someone who kind of sat on top with the broad vision, and then you had people who were experts in the specific line of businesses and business units, right? And they would collaborate on a regular basis, and they would be embedded with the sales teams when they go visit the clients. In some cases, I would actually go myself, right? I was kind of liaison with this team. This kept the sales teams in check. This team was aware of the stuff in the pipeline, right? And they also knew the features that we could offer based on the products and services we had available. And again, that gave us more focus, and we were able to leverage the synergies. They started hiring people from the outside who didn't have necessarily an affinity or loyalty to a specific startup company that was there. So that kind of helped remove things. And in some ways, so that just bettered the business strategy overall. This diagram was taken also from the book Managing Your Portfolio of Projects by Joanna Rothman. She also helped me at this time. So basically, essentially, you have a list of initiatives or projects right there on the left, prioritized by value, and then you review them on a regular basis, whether you're going to pivot or AKA transform them, still commit to them, or kill them, right? The killing part's always tough. So for confidentiality reasons, I can't name where this is from, but this is an example of that same model for a particularly large financial corporation doing portfolio governance right now. This is a draft, right? But you can see that there's a business case that they bring in, and they kind of go through these 3 phases on a monthly basis, okay? Not quarterly, not annually, monthly, right? This is a company that now wants their business to run in a lean and agile fashion. This second to the last column to the right is your development cycle. And in here you have meetings that happen regularly to reassess them as part of the portfolio pipeline. The idea is the business should drive the initiatives top down. What do we want to do this year, this quarter, this month? And does the stuff that's going on now as well as the stuff we have planned meet that? And then doing that decision of transforming, or pivoting, again, or committing or killing. And again, just making overall decisions on the overall, whether each of these initiatives or projects meet the strategy and the costs, same factors I talked about before. So I think we have 5 minutes left. So I was trying to get to the questions. So again, I hope I was able to demonstrate that. I know I kind of rushed through it a little bit. I'm also going to be available afterwards for any questions. Yes?
The business dimensions they use, those numbers, are they like story points? You just came up with some numbers that match? You had 1, 3, 5, 8?
Yeah, just 5 is the highest, 3, and 1. And I didn't really explain that to the business because what I was trying to do is, why did I start talking to a client? Oh, we delivered 80%, and we could probably get the money now, right? And once I was able to explain that, oh, okay, sure, go ahead.
The number you use is just something you came up with?
Yeah, with David Hersey, yes.
Okay.
So, and it worked, and I know other people, there's a little community of us in the finance industry in New York. We're all kind of using this. We've all talked about it. I'm not saying this is the way, right? But we're trying to learn from each other. Other questions?
Do you ever think of running your PMO in a Scrum?
Yes, we do. Well, for the company that's on there now, does, yes.
How many teams are involved?
So at the exchange, you're talking about maybe 15 different teams. And our locations were in Belfast, Paris, London, Manila, Pune, New York. Globally distributed. I'm sorry? Sorry. Other questions? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot. Does the business, where you measured costs against the backlog, did that kind of make sense too? Okay, I think we're good. So if you guys want to reach out to me, here's my contact information again. I'll be up here for a while, and if not, when the next presenter comes, I'll meet you outside. All right, thank you.